Again, welcome everyone. The Cohousing Association of the U.S. is very glad to have you with us tonight. I am Karen Gimnig. I'm the Associate Director of the Cohousing Association. Karen Hoskin is also with us tonight in a mostly listening capacity. She is the Executive Director of the Cohousing Association. And she is very busy these days planning for the conference coming up in Portland, and we'll make sure we tell you more about that. But the teaser is we are pretty sure at this point that it is going to be a sellout crowd. If you think you want to come to Portland to hang out with us, we recommend you get that registration in very soon. We think it's possible we will sell out even as early as the next couple of weeks. So make sure you get that reservation in if you want to join us, which we'd love to have you do. It's very exciting to have so many people interested in cohousing. So with that, I think I want to go ahead and introduce Liz. Liz Magill is with us from Mosaic Commons, although I think from somewhere on the road. I understand she's been in meetings all day, and I'm just thrilled that you're making the effort to be with us. She joined Mosaic Commons in 2002 and moved in 2009. Her day job is as a pastor, writer, and workshop leader, and she helps people address the hard things in life. And so she is with us tonight, and I'm going to let you introduce your topic and share your screen. I don't know if you have slides tonight.
I didn't pull together anything.
No problem. So I'll let you get started. Thanks for being here.
So I'm thrilled that so many of you are here, and am excited to tell you a little bit about conflict resolution at Mosaic Commons and in the world. I've taken, it's actually number 5 from my outline for my larger conflict resolution workshop, which is to get at the starting questions whenever you're facing a conflict, questions that I recommend that teams ask in order to decide whether they're proceeding forward. Some stuff that I would have said earlier is that each community makes its own boundaries as to what is appropriate conflict for a conflict resolution or community support team to handle. So I'm going to go through this as generically as I can. Each community would decide whether this fits their particular, whether the action would fit their particular community. So the questions that I have people ask is first, whether the conflict that's come up is addressed in their mandate. Does the team have the authority to handle the issue? And then the second question is this an individual or a community issue? In other words, is it a 2-person question or a broad question? And that's the topic I'm going to talk about tonight, is figuring out whether something's a individual or community issue. Before I go to that, I want to continue with the rest of the questions, which is who in the story is the person who needs help? Then the 4th question is, do we have the resources to provide the help? The 5th question is this something that can be solved? 6th question is, are the people involved willing to be part of the solution? And last, who are the people on our team that can handle this? So the second question is it an individual or a community issue? And this comes up a great deal in co-housing situations. And it happens, I see a lot of both forms of this. That when I'm on the facilitation team or on the process team, people will come and tell me that they need a process to handle people who speak out of turn during meetings. And they want that resolved as a process. And one of the things I've noticed is that question, like lots of questions, are people want a community solution to that. They want to make a rule for everyone, when really that's an individual problem. If you're annoyed that Betsy always talks out of turn, then you need to talk to Betsy and ask her not to talk out of turn. That making more rules when the problem is one or two individuals who are not cooperating, is an example of trying to come up with a community solution for an individual problem. And then it happens the other way around, that we have, I lost my train of thought. I just did. People want a community answer to an individual problem. We also have people who want individual solutions to community problems. So we get the thing of, will you talk to so-and-so and tell them not to gossip? And you want to ask the question of, what is the culture of our community? Is it actually that that's a whole cultural issue, and that everyone is engaging in gossip, and the person who's making the complaint just doesn't like it when one particular individual does it, but they don't mind it when other people do it? So there we have a community-wide issue, but a person is trying to just say one person is not following the situation. So it's always important when dealing with conflict to figure out which thing is going on. Is it a community problem or an individual problem? I have an example. So at a co-housing community I am very closely related to, we had a question about, we have a microwave stand. This is years old. We had a microwave stand that was very tall, and our dining room, our great room team, the people who handled the equipment that's in the room that we eat in, were having a discussion of just that team about whether they wanted to make it shorter. And oddly enough, the reason they were having the discussion is there was a question among the parents of whether they wanted their kids to have access to the microwave. So some parents wanted their kids to be able to get to the microwave, so they would lower it. And then there was other people who said no, they preferred their kids couldn't get access. So one of those emails went to our community list, reaching everyone, instead of to the great room team list. And that question that went to everyone was just, so I think we've decided to leave the microwave at the height that it's at. And a member of the community replied with, no, it's not handicap accessible at the height that it needs to be lowered. Then another person who was not on the team discussing this replied with, we don't have anybody in our community who uses a wheelchair, so it's not important that the microwave be lowered. This resulted in a probably 20 to 25 email thread of people saying how sad they were that people didn't care about anybody with disabilities, and other people saying, you guys are trying to use emotion to sway a decision, and instead of using logic, and you, by saying you're sad about this, you're trying to get out of using logic to make the decision. Along the way, one person said, I'm hurt that it's not important to all of you to take into account people with disabilities. I always feel hurt by this community that never cares about disabilities. And someone else said, that's ridiculous. This isn't about disabilities. This is about a microwave, not a ramp. So that got more and more heated, with people calling each other names, two people very strongly and a number of other people taking part. And then someone from our community support team said, please stop this discussion on email. And the person who had gone on and on about not ever being heard about disabilities said, well, that's fine, that community support thinks that when somebody doesn't feel heard, they should tell them to shut up. And that was the end of the email thread on this topic. So I'm interested in hearing from people whether you think this is a community discussion, a community issue, or an individual issue. Which means we have to let people talk. Sorry.
That's okay. So if anyone who'd like to speak to that, feel free to unmute yourself and speak right up.
This is Lizette at Grey Rock Commons. Can you hear me?
I can. Welcome.
Thank you. What I would say is this is what Laird would call a hairball issue. That it's not just one thing. There are so many different threads. One of which is don't have heated discussions in email. That I think it's difficult to tease out what is a community issue and what is an individual issue.
So I'm going to just restate that in case people didn't hear it. And so what I think I heard you say is that you would see this as what Laird would call a hairball issue with many, many issues, one of which has to do with how communities use email and what gets discussed there, and that some could be individual issues and some could be community issues.
Yes.
Okay.
So what might be a community issue and what might be an individual issue here?
I think policies around disability are community issues. What you might try to tease out from that is this microwave issue in and of itself a statement about disability support at our community?
I can't hear it.
So accessibility is a community issue, but might want to tease out from that whether the microwave is actually an accessibility issue.
Right. So what I would say to that is that if our accessibility team heard this discussion and came to community support and said, we have a community issue about accessibility that came out in this discussion, then the community support team would take on helping the accessibility team have an accessibility discussion. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So are you looking for other thoughts?
Other thoughts. So someone has asked, and I can't read the whole question, have you had nonviolent communication training? I assume is what the question was. Yes. So my community is one that has had that training, and people were quite strong in not wanting to be told how to have conversations.
So I have a question.
Uh-huh.
The question I have is whether there's also in this hairball a team versus community issue. I mean, I think I remember that the first thing you said was that is it in the mandate of the great room team to make this decision, or is this something larger than that? And so there seems to be a push-pull about whether the team has the right to make this decision. That seems to me to be a community level issue rather than two individuals.
Yes, yes. The question of whose mandate was relevant, definitely, it's me, not you, that made me so dark.
Yeah, that's okay.
I'm sitting in my car, and my car battery just said, no, you can't still have the lights on. In the car. I could move up to another street light, but anyway, the question of who is able to make this decision turns out from our community to not have anything to do with community support. So community support doesn't care that this is a great room team issue. I mean, we care because the problem's going to be resolved. The question of the microwave will be resolved. What community support is concerned about is the health of the community and the health of individuals. So luckily our process team can jump in and say, this is actually a great room decision. It was a mistake that the email was sent to the wrong list, and the microwave issue gets resolved. But the community support team's question is, how is the health of our community? So they ended up needing to have a discussion about, is this a community issue or an individual issue? Other reactions?
Could I say that I think that the person who said, I'm not supported here, I don't feel like I belong, or whatever she said or he said, I think that would be also an individual reaction too, and that some kind of outreach to that person would be really necessary.
Yes. Somebody who is named pain is always someone that it's worth checking with afterwards of how did that happen. I will say that part of checking with that person is helping them see that the fact that one or two people said something is not the same as everyone saying something. You get lots of everyone thinks that. So that's one of the issues with dealing with individual issues, is helping people see, do you have an issue with the whole community, or do you have an issue with a few people in the community, and then working with them to find a way to deal with the specific people who did something annoying to them.
Someone says, can the answer be that it's both?
That it's both community and
individual, yeah.
Yes, they're absolutely. I picked an example that has parts that are. But one of the challenges for a community support team is to treat those two things as separate things. So we have a community issue, and when we have that discussion, we want to only discuss the community components of it, and we have some individual issues. And we might even want to try to see if we can work on the individual issues before we get to the community issues.
Other responses, observations about this situation, questions?
I have a question. How do you go about making that decision between the individual and the community?
Yeah. So what we end up doing is really tussling with it a lot, and then asking over and over again, does that affect everyone or just a few people? So we sit in a team going over what was said, and ask who we think it affects. Now, this is heavily affected by how you decide your community support mandate works. So in our particular situation, we have a lot of authority to deal with individual issues, and we have a little bit of authority to deal with community issues. So some of what we end up doing is saying, well, what are the individual issues we can work on? And then saying, can we imagine language for how it's a community issue that lots of people would buy into? Because we would need approval from the community to lead a community discussion on something like this. And we don't need approval from the community to do one-on-one sharing. So in another community, you might come to a different decision about what your community support team's mandate is, that you're allowed to do that.
So the distinction between, say, norms and values is is really challenged there.
Yeah, and I have to say, I think that anytime you create a conflict resolution team or a community support team, whatever the mandate says and what the community actually thinks, the norms of the community are highly influential. We had a problem early on that people thought that they had been called in by the community support team. And so that resulted in a culture that made the people more anxious about community support taking on issues. So we went to the opposite extreme of never taking on an issue unless someone asked us to. Mm-hmm. And now we're learning to walk that middle route where we declare this is in our mandate, we're allowed to do this. And this is for the good of the community to take on the issue. But that is one of the things we'll talk about a lot in the workshop is what is the culture, your community's culture, and how does a community support team or a conflict resolution team fit into your community's culture. If it's a team that no one will get help from, then you might as well not create it, right?
Have you considered changing the mandate?
Not presently. We don't really have people on our team at this point who want to take on the community issues. But we might get to a place. We actually just had a workshop with Eris on storytelling. What is the story we tell about our community? And we have some bigger issues to resolve than how community support works. But I can imagine using that question of what stories do we tell as a way of changing how we do community support in a more positive way around community-wide issues.
So we have a question, is there also an issue of how we use email for difficult discussions, and does that affect everyone?
Yeah, so this is again a cultural thing about communities. We have had screaming fights on email in which people have insisted that email is the only way they're willing to communicate. So we are a community that has email discussion, and we've had Laird out as a trainer with us, and we know that he is strongly opposed to ever doing that. This is from 2012, this discussion that I'm sharing with you. We have gotten much better at it. And one of the ways we've gotten better about it that we'll talk about in the training is community support took on the role of helping people who don't like a discussion that's happening to speak up and say, I don't appreciate the language you're using. Instead of waiting for either a community support person to say that or just getting mad and removing themselves from the discussion. So now that 5 or 6 people in the community are likely to say, please, can you reword what you just said in a way that doesn't call me ridiculous or something like that, then our email discussion has improved very much. So I guess I will say that there's a theory that you should just never use email. You also can learn to use email better.
Makes a lot of sense. So someone said there was a question follow-up to the nonviolent communication piece, which was that she's curious what may have caused people to believe that NVC was being somehow forced on them.
The presenter who did it for us suggested that we adopt it as a strategy for communication.
Okay. More questions, thoughts, responses?
So I have another individual in that conversation who I think community support needs to check on. that we often don't check on, which is the person who used the angry language about "you're manipulating me, I make decisions logically." It is common to presume that people who are saying we should decide logically, therefore don't have any feelings about what just happened. So one of the challenges for a community support team is to recognize that the people who are, certainly in this case, the person who was accused of being a bully, had feelings about that also. That who is the person who needs the support is not always completely clear. I see that Melanie says logic is a way of masking feelings. Do not say that to a person who says that they want to use logic, not feelings, because they don't believe that. But as a member of the community support team, remember that no matter how they word it, people have feelings. Yeah, exactly. Melanie says, you don't say that, but you would realize that. Yeah.
Yeah. So you say it's not always completely clear who might need help or who might be having strong feelings. What are some strategies for figuring that out when it's not clear?
Yeah, so one thing that in 2018 we would do with a discussion like this on the community support team is, rather than a note saying please shut down the discussion, we would say, just want to remind you that the community support team is available to, if this has brought up any feelings or interactions for you, if there's any individuals who'd like to talk to us, we'd be glad to meet with you. So that's a strategy we use to insert ourselves in the conversation more as observers and supporters and less as enforcers of a set of rules. And part of the reason we can do that is we've helped I started to say congregation, community. I just came from a church meeting. We've helped the community be better at saying, I don't appreciate that language, when people use language that they don't appreciate. So we don't need to be the only people who are going to say, please stop this.
Right.
I feel like I didn't do a long enough presentation.
That's okay. Are there other thoughts about this or other questions?
So I have a question. I guess you can't see me, but the people who are on the community support team, do they do other things like facilitating meetings or, looking at getting work done or bringing proposals through, or is their only role in the community just this community conflict resolution team?
Yep. So this is one of the things we'll do in the short workshop that I'm doing at the co-housing presentation, which is I'll have a thing about how to create a community support team, and there are many ways to do that. At Mosaic, we only do community support. I actually like one of Laird's models, which is that community support is a big umbrella organization that has under it facilitating and process and individual support. But we really do the opposite. We have a steering committee that runs the business of the community, and community support is just one of the small groups that only does, mostly does one-on-one support and a small amount of bringing topics up to the whole community to do system-wide support.
So then do you have a separate team that does facilitation and general meetings and that kind of thing?
We do. We do. We have a team that's just facilitates meetings, and then we have a team that just looks at how the process is working, so that, for example, in this case, where that's the team that would speak up and say, so this is actually, the microwave is actually in the mandate of the Great Room team. So if you still have opinions about what should happen with the microwave, please join, send those comments only to the Great Room team, because they have the authority to make this decision.
Great. Okay. And is there other interface between those three teams?
Not really. I happen to be on all three of them. So in a way there is, but that's not really, there's not a formal way to have overlapping information between those teams. And I see a question about governance. We do not have a governance system. We are old style co-housing, where you start and say we're going to make consensus decision making, and everything flies from there without a specific governance structure. And the microwave did not get lowered. It turned out, I have to say, it turned out to be a technical problem. If you have a microwave stand that you've bought and you just cut the back of it off and try to lower it down, it doesn't have the support to hold the weight of the microwave.
Aha.
Yeah. No, there was not any adverse effect on the Great Room team. I would say that in today's world at Mosaic Commons, we now have a thing that that people can bring up something that came up in email at our general meeting, so that then we just have rounds about the topic, and that's when people say things like, I wish you wouldn't use the word ridiculous. They usually have calmed down enough by then that the discussion then is, I wish you hadn't used the word ridiculous. This wasn't really any of our business anyway. The Great Room team gets to decide it, is the way that discussion goes. And a community support team can be effective in helping make sure that those things that go awry come back and get discussed when people are in a calmer place to talk about them. So somebody says it was really an exercise in decisions and conflict. We did a lot of experimenting with having conflict in the early years. I don't know whether other communities have that same experience, but that could be why I believe very much into having a community support or conflict resolution team, is that we really fought it out early on. In the half-day workshop that I'll do, I will bring lots of examples of conflicts that happen in community, and I've certainly got them from other communities also, but I have a fair number that come from Mosaic.
I have a theory that a good consensus process is a 10-year program, that it just takes that long. If you work at it, you can make it longer.
Yes, I would totally agree. We have gotten better at it. That's why I feel like I can offer a workshop in what we have learned to improve our conflict resolution. Yep.
Yeah. Can you give some examples of problems that you would not recommend a conflict or community support team getting involved in?
Yeah, I think so. On my list of tests, one of the things on the list is whether there's a solution to the problem. So people come with conflicts that they want resolved. Well, first of all, people come with conflicts that they want resolved that they don't want to do the work on it. And at this stage, we do not help with any conflict that the person involved does not want to be part of. We are willing to give people advice on what they can say. We're willing to come with them if they want someone to come with them, but we will not, we do not do any conflict resolution for someone. We have a conflict in our community where some people would like one of our renters to leave the community, and the landlord of that renter does not want them to leave the community. And I would say that comes up every 6 to 8 months at this point, more often at the beginning. And the answer to that is, if they would like to talk to the landlord, we'd be glad to come with them. But we have no legal authority. We are a conflict. We're a team where two people are talking to each other, not a team where there's no, co-housing has no way to say you can't rent to that person.
So again, that would be an individual kind of conflict then, because it can't be a community conflict. Is that?
Yes. And I will say that issue always is presented as, this is bad for our community, you should make it end. And our answer is always, we don't have any authority to make it end. If you'd like to deal with it on an individual level, we will help you. And that's a case, I mean, I talked earlier about our mandate doesn't give us a lot of power to do community-wide issues. But this is a case where the community doesn't have the authority to tell a person who they can have as a tenant in their house. It doesn't have anything to do with our mandate. It is simply, one of the challenges of co-housing is, I think, that people come in thinking it means that we will have a lot of control over who else is around with us. Mm-hmm. And that's simply not true. Mm-hmm. I have a question here about the process team. That's not really what this is about, but I will say that our process team, our facilitation team used to handle how the meetings run and to actually facilitate the meetings. And that meant that we were sometimes on the side of an issue. So, for example, defining what a red card means and how you test a red card. Like, we would come to the meeting saying we want to approve this policy about red cards. And that was highly problematic for the facilitation team to have an opinion. So the process team is mostly the same people, but it is to look at the process that we use for making decisions and getting work done. And the process team also can help any other team that's having trouble getting the work done. Mm-hmm. So sometimes the process team meets with, our example is the kids team, where there's a lot of disagreement between people, and they're trying to use straight consensus, and we've done a lot of work with them to get them to say, maybe consensus isn't the best strategy for this team. Maybe you need a different decision-making strategy.
Great. And I think I heard you say earlier too that the process team might help determine who has authority to make certain kinds of decisions and kind of answer those kinds of questions. Is that true?
Yes. The process team would notice what somebody's mandate says and say, so our process is that this team gets to make that decision. And then even further, and the process is that if you want to tell this team input, here's their email address that you can give input. Yep.
Great. Thank you. And Donald, I think you were getting ready to say something?
Yes, and I was going to type it in. the chat. So my question is, do you make a distinction between consensus as an event and a consensus as a part of the culture?
I have never thought about that. No, I don't think we make a distinction about it. I think we think of it as an event.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the distinction that was important to us and has been for a while is how is it that we get together on whenever an issue comes up and work through it in a way that doesn't take plenary time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, part of why I would say it's not a culture is one of the things that happens for us a lot, going back to this question about email, is that maybe a third of the community is very active on email, and people will act as if we've made a decision because many people on email have stated an opinion. But 34 households and 8 people have stated an opinion. That's not anything close to consensus. But I think that, so I would say we don't have the culture because we people don't even recognize that. What they see is no objections. So although we're certainly moving to a decision-making strategy that will have many more types of decisions that are made based on having no objections rather than on having consensus. But that's I'm not prepared to talk about how to do decision making.
I will say that our web chats sometimes take on a life of their own. So
I'm sure.
I will let you set your boundaries.
Yes. I will just say that I feel like I have some knowledgeable input about how to handle conflict. And I just have really strong opinions about how to make decisions.
I like that distinction.
I'm wise about one, I'm opinionated about the other.
And you know yourself well.
Yes.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Are there other questions for Liz? Could you go through one more time that you had that very list of questions at the very beginning?
Yes.
And they were a little quick, so I thought you might run through those one more time.
I might even be able to put them in the notes as I do it. Oh, I don't know if I did. I thought I did. But anyway, so there's questions to start every time there's a conflict. And the first question is this in our mandate? And that will depend on various communities have authority to do different things. Then, is this an individual or a community issue?
I can't hear either. I know.
Oh,
It's recording.
did I go away?
Nope, you're here. I've got you.
So the second question, is this an individual or a community issue? The third question, who in the incident or the story is the person who needs help? The fourth question is, do we have the resources to provide this help? The sixth question is this something that can be resolved? And then, are the people involved willing to be part of the resolution? And then, who are the people on our team that can handle this? I will say that's something that comes up more and more as you're in community for longer and longer. Issues come up where one of the people who's the challenge is somebody who's on the community support team. So a lot of discussion of who on community support is going to own a particular issue.
Do you have a process for how to select your community support team?
We do. We require that they have been in the community for a certain amount of time. And we mostly invite people to be part of the team rather than looking for volunteers. I will say that we've had a great deal of success with a few people who were not very good at, they were not obvious picks for a community support team, but they chose to be on the team, and we didn't have them do any mediation because they really didn't have the skills to stay out of the story, but they learned to be better community members by being on the team and being part of the discussion of what we were going about. And one of the things that I will spend some time on in the introductory session is the difference between, so lots of people who volunteer to be on community support are counselors, pastors, MSWs, and being in community means you're really doing a different job than any of those jobs. So there's an importance in defining the role of community support team as not a therapist and not a social worker and not a pastor, and remembering that when we're doing the work. So while we all might be good at the separating ourselves from the issue, as a pastor, it's important that I'm not suggesting that people need to bring God in on the discussion, and an MSW is not in to figure out. We had a recent fight that there was a big financial difference between the two people having the fight. The MSW's job was not to figure out how to improve the person's health insurance. The therapist's job is not to provide therapy for either of the components. So that's one of the challenges of a community support team, is the best people to do it need to be in a different role when they're supporting their community.
That makes a lot of sense too. There have been some questions about if they could get the list of questions. Can you email those to me, and I will make sure that a document gets added to the website so everyone can access it that way?
Yep.
That's okay.
I will do that.
Could I ask a question here about, I'm wondering roughly how many people are on each of your teams, the facilitating the process and the sort of conflict resolution, how often they meet? Does the conflict resolution meet sort of when there's an issue? And then also what kind of training and outside training do you do for those teams?
So each of the teams is 5 or 6 people. The conflict resolution team at Mosaic only meets when there's an issue. One of the things, I've got a survey, and I don't have the material in front of me right now, but many teams do this differently than Mosaic does. I'm forgetting the name of the community, but I'm pushing our team to do what they do. They have a budget every year for training, and they send anyone in the community who's interested in a specific conflict resolution strategy to go. They send someone each year. So they have now a book that says, if you want to do this type of conflict resolution, these 4 people have been trained. If you want to do this type of conflict resolution, these 3 people. If you want to learn NVC, these people are trained. So that they end up not so much training themselves on the team as being the resource to make sure many people in the community are trained in a wide variety of ways. So they meet more often because they meet to look at what's out there and say, this is the training that's available this year, is this program that we've looked at and decided it would be valuable to our community. I feel like there might have been another question in there I didn't get to.
If there was, I didn't catch it either.
Okay.
We probably have time for about one more. Does anyone have a last question for the night? I've learned in this process that questions tend to come in clusters and then
Yes.
peaks and valleys of the question flow.
Yeah.
So since there's a pause, I'll just shift our thinking a little bit to the upcoming conference. So you mentioned a number of times the workshops you'll be doing, and that's, I'm assuming you're referring to the National Cohousing Conference in Portland.
Yes.
And do you want to say explicitly what you're presenting there?
Yeah. So I'm doing 2 workshops. I'm doing one of the pre-workshops, and that's, I can't remember how, it's a half a day, and that will go through a lot about how to handle conflicts and how to decide which ones to handle. This was step 5 of that training I have set up, and that will include many examples, and as a group we will work through those examples and come up with solutions, how a team might address that. Because one of the things that's important to me is that, you know, each community is going to have their own style of how to do conflict resolution. So it's not just how to do it at Mosaic, but as a community, we will work on those specific samples that I will bring.
That's great. And that's a pre-conference intensive, yes?
Yes, a pre-conference intensive. And then during the conference, I will do one of the short presentations, and that's it's listed for forming communities, I'm pretty sure, but it's really for anybody who doesn't have a team that wants to have a team. And it's who should be on the team, what might your mandate say, what are the questions you want to resolve before you start having a team. So it's really how to get started having conflict resolution as part of what you have. I will tell you as an aside that I'm going to argue against the language of conflict resolution, but it's hard to explain what the workshop is without saying conflict resolution. So I left it in the title, but then I'll suggest that you call it something else.
I resonate with that. So I love that. So 2 offerings, the pre-conference intensive, which you need to register for separately or in addition to your conference registration, and you can do that online anytime. And then you're also offering the session about how to set up the team, which is part of the regular conference. And I'll just say to everyone, it is possible to let us know which of those sessions you're planning to come to. It's not required, but it does help the conference team sort of assign rooms. If we get an idea in advance, oh, there's going to be a lot of interest in this, they can put it in a larger room. So that's something to look at also. And I see Karen has given the conference website link in the chat. So take a look at that, everyone. We do, as I said at the very beginning of the call, we are anticipating a sellout crowd. In fact, we're anticipating that we could sell out within the next week or 2. And of course, saying that makes it all the more likely to happen faster. But we are well over 400 registrants at this point. Karen was telling me this morning that she thinks we might hit 500 as early as the coming week. So we're pretty close to hitting what the fire marshal will allow, and we think that's super exciting. And we think it's in part because our conference team is so incredibly amazing. They've done a great job putting it together, and I think it's going to be a whole lot of fun. So if you're interested, sign up soon. This is not something you want to wait and register for at the last minute. And Liz will be there along with lots and lots of other folks. The next web chat is actually worth noting. It's a little different. Michael LaFond is going to be with us, and he lives in Berlin. So when I suggested the regular web chat time, he very kindly said that would be fine to do it at 2 a.m. his time, but we decided to be kind to him, and it's still going to be midnight for him. But he'll be with us talking about cluster apartments and I think some flats related to co-housing. So he'll be in Berlin joining us at 3 p.m. Pacific time, 6 p.m. Eastern on Friday of next week, so April 12th, a little ways out. And Karen has that in the chat as well. So that's the next web chat. As always, we remind you that the web chats are given at no cost to you, but do not arrive at no cost to the association actually. And if you are appreciating the program, if you can help keep the association financially solvent, that makes a huge difference to us. So Karen will put the donation link in the chat if you want to make a one-time donation, or we're particularly encouraging folks to become what we're calling an evergreen neighbor. This is someone who sets up an ongoing monthly donation that's just an automated monthly donation. And those, even in small amounts, make a huge difference to our budget. So think about that. And then the last thing I need to announce for the good of the order is that this month, we're already in April, is the National Open House Day for Co-Housing. It is on Saturday, April 27th. So if you live in community and your community has not yet signed up to be part of that event, it is not too late. You can go to the website and there's a place to let us know your information about the event you're planning, and we'll get you added to the list. And if you are not part of community, or if you are and you're just wanting to see how other people do things, take a look at the list and reserve that day to go visiting at communities. There will be open houses across the country for co-housing that day. Karen, did I forget anything?
I don't think so. I think you got it all.
Okay, so lots going on. Spring is busy time here at the Co-Housing Association, and we're so glad to have spent this evening with you. And Liz, thank you for all of your stories and ideas and suggestions. I think it was super helpful, and really appreciate you fitting us in on such a busy day for you.
I should plan better.
Now that just makes it exciting.
I keep trying to get my picture to show.
The wonders of technology.
Yes.
That you can be with us even as you're in the car, and we're spread all over the country and probably in Canada too. I haven't looked at the list tonight, but we usually have some Canadians with us, so that's fun. So, okay. Well, thanks everyone for being here. We will see you next week. And Liz, we'll see you in Portland.
We'll see you in Portland.
Great. Thanks everybody. Good night.
Thanks everybody. Good night.